Ukrainian authorities have begun evacuating people from dozens of locations in the Sumy region near the border with Russia. So far, officials have brought over 50,000 people to safety, according to the region's military governor. He says that's half the number of civilians who need to evacuate. Russia has been heavily attacking Sumy for months. On the other side of the border, Russian President Vladimir Putin has visited Kursk for the first time since Russia said it expelled Ukrainian forces in April. He visited a nuclear plant which is under construction. I asked military analyst Frank Ledwich if there are signs of a big Russian offensive coming to Sumy.
Well, good morning, Ben. Big, I would say no, but certainly of sufficient significance to attract the attention, or considerable attention, on the part of the Ukrainian defences. The Russians have put together what they've called a northern group of forces in that area. Essentially, they've moved from Kursk, following the somewhat lackluster Ukrainian withdrawal from there earlier this year, into Sumy region to create a buffer zone. But there doesn't seem to be much in the way of bulk or coordination in this. Nonetheless, undoubtedly, the Ukrainians are anticipating a reasonable sized operation in the near future, and that's why they're evacuating that border area.
Is that what this has come down to in this war, Russia creating buffer zones to shore up what it sees as needed future territory?
Well, it's been like that for some time. They had one in the Belgorod region just to the south. Of course, there was that significant incursion last year into Kharkiv, and this one into Sumy, which they would call a security zone. And they do present a threat to the Ukrainian forces because what they do, of course, is stretch them. And they also fix Ukrainian forces in place, forces, of course, which would be better used elsewhere. So, yes, it is a practice the Russians are using. And needless to say, Ben, in the future, going forward, in the event of negotiations, that land can be used as leverage against other demands the Russians are making.
But, Frank, what would you say, what sort of position is Russia in to keep up several of these regions, of these buffer zones, all at once? Does it have the forces to do that?
Well, look, it's a very long front. It's a 1,000-mile front, and I think both sides are very stretched. Both sides are suffering shortages. In the Russian case, probably material. In the Ukrainian case, certainly manpower. But I think it's fair to say that the Russians aren't suffering in the manpower, on the manpower front or in the drone front. And so they can afford, as it were, to prepare for significant operations this year, possibly on several fronts. Summer's coming, and of course, that's good weather.
And what about Ukraine? What position is it in to continue to hold off the Russians?
Well, since the start, the Ukrainians have been relying more on their own devices, but mainly on the moral component. There's no way I think the Ukrainian forces are going to break, but they're going to be seriously stretched. They do have manpower issues. There are those internal debates going on about mobilization of young men in their early 20s. They're quite divisive, and they indicate a real issue there. But in terms of the position the Ukrainians are in to keep holding the Russians back, they will continue to do so, but they'll have to cede land in order to make that happen. And sadly, they will keep retreading, they will keep retreating as the summer goes on. That's just the way it's going to be. The Russians have too much of a preponderance in that for it to be otherwise.
And just to put this all into perspective, Ukraine's president and many American officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, don't believe Russia is interested in peace and is just buying time with negotiations at the moment. What is Russia's ultimate goal then?
Nobody knows. You'd have to ask the presidency that. However, the indications are that at the very least they will want to secure those 4 provinces or 5 provinces, including Crimea in the south. And for that, they're going to take a lot more time to grind forward in that attritional manner they use and get as far as they can before they run out of steam, which may be next year or the year after. Won't be this year, though.
Military analyst Frank Ledwich there with the analysis. Thank you very much for being on Detail here.
Thank you, Ben.